The first gunshot wasn't fired by the aliens. It was fired by us. That's why they're afraid of humans, though they won't admit it. The dome lit up with crimson alarms, casting jagged shadows across a battlefield that wasn't supposed to end. The survival simulation had no finish line, only a counter that ticked down the expected survival time. For most species, that counter dropped to 0 in days. For humans, it rarely broke hours. Captain Elias Kane stood in the middle of the storm, helmet under one arm, rifle in the other. He had walked into the chamber with no expectation of victory, no delusions about what the simulation was meant for. He wasn't here to learn. He was here to prove something, though to whom, he wasn't sure anymore. Predicted duration blinked above him in sterile white light, 3 days, 4 hours. He smirked, voice low. Let's cut that down. The battlefield formed around him, a city reduced to rubble, towers half collapsed, smoke rising in oily black plumes. Enemy units spawned at every street corner, kite-armored insects skittering across broken glass, war drones humming with the faint glow of plasma cores, siege beasts slumbering on hydraulic limbs, their weapons already warming up. The AI voice spoke from nowhere and everywhere. Commence. The first wave came fast. Kane moved faster. He slid behind the carcass of a transport, rifle bucking in controlled bursts. A drone went down, sparks scattering across cracked concrete. He didn't stop shooting when he ran dry. He flipped the empty rifle into a drone's face, drew the sidearm from his thigh, and kept moving. Predictable, he muttered. The simulation thought in patterns. He thought in chaos. He dropped explosives and choke points, knowing the AI would adapt, calculating routes. He wanted it to. Each adjustment it made, he turned against it. When it flooded streets, he climbed rooftops. When it launched aerial swarms, he dove into subways, fighting with knife and broken pipe. Hours bled together in sweat and smoke. The pain was real. The code didn't spare him the taste of his own blood. At one point, a beam sliced across his side, burning deep. He staggered but refused to fall. Is that all? He spat, wiping his mouth. In the control chamber outside, alien tacticians leaned toward the glass, silent. Their data streams couldn't keep pace with what they saw. No one had ever forced the program to break rhythm. One scientist whispered, "He shouldn't last this long." Another answered, "Humans don't last. They adapt." Inside, Kane had stopped counting kills. He didn't need to. Every move was survival sharpened into instinct. He detonated charges too close, using his own blast wave to throw himself clear. He ripped control nodes from disabled drones, rewiring them mid-fight, turning enemy turrets on their own ranks. At one point, he tore a jagged piece of steel from rubble and used it to sever a beast's hydraulic limb. When it crashed forward, screaming in synthesized agony, he climbed its spine and fired point-blank into its control core. Blood and circuitry coated him. He didn't notice. The AI ramped up difficulty. The sky filled with battleships. The ground split under siege engines. Infantry poured in endless streams. The simulation wasn't supposed to be beaten, only endured. But Kane was no longer playing by its rules. Between exchanges, his calm crackled. Commander Varetha's voice slid through, laced with contempt. "Human, end this. You were never meant to win. You are data. Nothing more." Kane ducked under a collapsing wall, face twisted into a grin. "You built a cage," he growled, "and forgot we're the species that chews through bars." By the 4th hour, even the simulation faltered. Warning codes flashed in the sky like broken constellations. Kane staggered through fire and ruin, barely upright. His arm bled freely, one eye swollen shut. Still, he pressed forward. A swarm of drones cornered him in the ruins of a stadium. Their optics glowed blue, targeting systems locking. Kane leaned against the crumbling wall, laughter bubbling from his chest, half crazed. "You don't get it, do you?" he rasped. "You stacked the deck, loaded the dice, set the table against me. But you forgot one thing." He raised his last grenade, thumbed the pin free, and hurled it into the swarm. "I don't play fair. The explosion tore the stadium apart. Drones fell in shards of burning alloy. Kane stumbled through smoke, coughing, alive. Barely. Back in the chamber, panic spread among the observers. Systems flagged anomalies. Error, simulation parameters exceeded. Warning, containment breach. Impossible, one technician breathed. No one survives this long. The code isn't built for completion. Varetha's claws dug into the console. Shut it down. Now. Marek, the Chancellor, raised a hand. Wait. His eyes locked on the screen. He's rewriting the ending. Let him. The final sequence hit like a tidal wave. Titans fell from orbit, crushing blocks under their mass. Their cannons burned entire streets into glass. Kane looked up at them, exhaustion etched into every line of his body. His chest heaved. His skin was raw with burns. But his eyes, they burned hotter than the sky. Years, huh? His voice cracked, broken but defiant. You said this thing was built to last years. He dragged himself to the nearest Titan, scaled its burning hull, and jammed a salvaged beam rifle into the seam of its armor. With a final roar, he fired until the weapon melted in his hands. The Titan collapsed in a shower of sparks, shaking the simulation itself. The sky fractured. Reality itself buckled. The dome collapsed in silence. Kane staggered forward into emptiness, every muscle screaming. His vision blurred, but his voice carried clear as a blade. Humanity doesn't need years. We finish wars in hours. The simulation dissolved. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on the steel floor outside the dome. The chamber was silent. Dozens of eyes, alien, machine, reptilian, insectoid, stared at him in stunned disbelief. On the console above them, the readout flickered one last time before freezing in bold red. Simulation completed. Duration, 6 hours, 13 minutes. Kane wiped blood from his mouth, teeth bared in a half-smile. So, he rasped. Still think humanity's a footnote? No one answered. Because in that moment, every alien in the room understood something their empires had spent centuries denying. Humans weren't just survivors. They were predators. The chamber doors hissed open, and Kane stepped out of the simulation dome as if he'd crawled from a war zone. His uniform was torn, streaked with dried blood. His eyes, those unyielding steel-gray eyes, told a story the observers weren't ready to hear. A hush fell over the control deck. Dozens of alien officers, scientists, and tacticians stared through the glass, some clutching datapads, others frozen mid-breath. The projection above them still flickered with warnings. Simulation failure. Duration, 6 hours, 13 minutes. Result, completion. No record in the galaxy had ever displayed that word. Kane dragged his hand across his jaw, smearing blood. So, he rasped, voice sandpaper rough. Was that the test you wanted? No one answered. Not at first. Commander Vareth finally broke the silence, slamming his claws against the console. His scales flushed from green to black, the sign of fury in his species. You broke it, he snarled. That construct was designed to crush entire battalions, not me? Kane cut in. His voice carried across the chamber like a blade. That's the problem with all of you. You measure strength in battalions. We measure it in what's left standing. Murmurs rippled through the alien dignitaries. Some whispered fear, others anger. One leaned close to another and muttered, If a single human can destabilize the system. Kane's hearing was sharp enough to catch it. He leaned on the rail, knuckles white. Then imagine what billions can do. The council summoned him hours later. Kane sat at the center of an amphitheater carved from polished obsidian. Tier after tier of alien leaders filled the seats, cold-eyed reptilians, insectoid lords, machine emissaries whose voices echoed through synthesizers. At the very top, draped in gold and crimson robes, sat Chancellor Marek of the Coalition. Marek's voice was calm, but each word dripped with condescension. Captain Kane, humanity's performance in the simulation is impressive. But dangerous. This trial was never meant to be conquered. Its purpose is to expose weakness, to establish limits. And you have muddied the results. Kane leaned forward. I didn't muddy anything. I showed you the truth. You thought you could write humanity's obituary. Instead, I wrote the warning on your wall. The chamber erupted in voices, overlapping shouts in a dozen alien tongues. The Chancellor raised one long-fingered hand, and silence slammed down like a hammer. Your kind is volatile, he said. Unpredictable. If left unchecked, humans could destabilize more than simulations. They could destabilize the galaxy. Kane met his gaze without flinching. Good. Because the galaxy needs destabilizing. Later, in the holding quarters, Kane finally found a moment of quiet. He sat on the bunk, staring at his scarred hands. The simulation had left its mark, not just bruises and burns, but the weight of memory. Every scream, every blast, every improvised kill was etched behind his eyes. It was supposed to be code. But it felt real. The door slid open, and a woman entered. Not alien. Human. She wore the crisp black uniform of a Coalition intelligence officer, though the insignia was muted, as if she didn't want anyone to know she was there. Captain Kane! Her voice was sharp, professional, but her eyes betrayed recognition. Name Celine Ward. Intelligence Division. Kane's brow furrowed. Since when does intelligence care about a simulation? She closed the door. Since we discovered it wasn't just a simulation. He froze. Explain. She lowered her voice. What you fought in there wasn't randomly generated. It was pulled from live data feeds. Enemy troop movements. Alien deployments. Rogue AI weapon caches. You weren't battling ghosts, you were fighting the real war, compressed into hours. Kane's stomach turned cold. They made me the rehearsal. Celine nodded grimly. And you won. Which means two things. 1. Our enemies know a human can outthink their war doctrines. And 2. The Coalition will never let you walk free. You're a weapon now. And weapons don't get to choose. The next morning, Kane was summoned again. But this time, the chamber wasn't filled with dignitaries. Only 3 stood waiting: Chancellor Marek, Commander Vareth, and an obsidian skin machine intelligence that pulsed with blue light. Marek's tone was measured. Captain, the Coalition faces a crisis. An unknown force has begun dismantling outposts across the rim. Entire fleets vanish without trace. What you fought in the simulation, we believe it was them. The program wasn't a test. It was preparation. Kane's lips curled. You built a war game out of our extinction. Vareth hissed. And you broke it. Now the enemy knows we're desperate enough to use your kind. Kane rose, fists clenched. You don't get it, do you? You don't get what it means to fight with your back to the wall. Humans don't need years of attrition. We need hours. Give us a chance, and we'll burn through the enemy faster than your fleets could calculate. The machine intelligence's voice boomed, metallic and calm. Probability matrices confirm. Human adaptive combat efficiency exceeds projected variance by 412%. Recommendation: deploy Subject Kane as field commander. Marek stiffened. Unacceptable. He is untested in real campaigns. Kane barked a bitter laugh. What do you think that was? He jabbed a finger toward the dome beyond the window. I fought your war before it began. And I didn't just survive. I won. They argued for hours. In the end, the council was split. Half wanted Kane executed to erase the threat. Half wanted him weaponized. Celine Ward found him afterward, her expression tight. You've made yourself the most dangerous man in the galaxy, Elias. Good, he said, voice low. Dangerous is the only thing they respect. She leaned closer, whispering. If you want to live long enough to prove it, you'll need allies. Ones the Coalition doesn't control. He narrowed his eyes. You offering? Her smile was faint, bitter. I'm offering a choice. Stay the weapon, or become something more. Kane didn't answer. But his silence was louder than any oath. That night, as he stared out the viewport, the stars felt different. Not cold. Not distant. Alive. He imagined fleets hiding behind them, waiting. Predators circling. And humanity, broken, scattered, underestimated, standing alone. He whispered to himself. If they want a war, they'll get one. On our terms. Behind him, the alarms began to sound again. This time, they weren't simulations. The alarms didn't stop. They weren't simulation tones anymore, they were live. Real. The Coalition's orbital defense grid screamed warnings across every channel. Kane stood in the observation deck, chest still wrapped in bandages, his body wrecked from the trial. Yet his gaze was steady as he stared at the stars. They weren't still. They rippled. Something vast moved against the void. Celine Ward joined him, face pale in the red wash of emergency light. That's not a drill, she whispered. It never is, Kane muttered. The alien council filed into the deck, scaled diplomats, insected generals, machine envoys. All of them spoke at once, their languages colliding in panic. The Chancellor slammed his staff for silence, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his calm facade. On the display, icons blinked out one by one. Outposts. Patrol fleets. Gone. Celine leaned closer, her voice low. That's what you fought in the dome. It wasn't theory. It was intel. They'd been testing us through the program, running their war in secret while we burned in simulation. Kane's jaw tightened. They weren't preparing us. They were preparing themselves. The first enemy ship breached visual range. A leviathan of jagged steel, black as a starless void, bristling with weapon arrays no Coalition database could identify. The room fell silent. One vessel, and already the defense system struggled to lock on. Vareth bared his fangs. Deploy the fleet. Now. No, Kane said, voice cutting through the panic. Every eye snapped toward him. You throw numbers at them, they'll erase you the way they erased the Sims armies. That's how they fight, attrition, crushing waves, overwhelming force. And you've been playing into their hands for centuries. The Chancellor's tone dripped with disdain. And what would you suggest, Captain? A single human charge? Heroism does not scale to fleets. Kane turned from the window, blood seeping through his bandages. No. But strategy does. You asked how a man could beat a program designed to last years. The answer's simple. You stop trying to outlast them. You make them bleed fast. The chamber erupted in debate. The aliens argued for containment protocols, evacuation plans, negotiations. Kane waited for their voices to circle into useless spirals, then slammed his fist against the console. Look at me, he roared. The sound cut through everything. I don't have days. Humanity doesn't have years. We've been dying in hours for as long as I can remember. And that's why we win. Because hours are all we need. Celine stepped forward, backing him. He's right. You've all been staring at statistics, waiting for wars to fit your charts. Kane already showed you the flaw in your models. You want survival? Put him in command. Vareth hissed. A human leading our fleets? Madness. The machine envoy pulsed with light, its voice even. Probability matrices confirm. Subject Kane increases survival odds by 327% compared to Coalition doctrine. Recommendation: authorize temporary command. The Chancellor's face twisted, but he gave the smallest nod. Very well. Human. The fleet is yours. Succeed, or be erased with your species. Kane didn't smile. He only turned back to the viewport. Get me a warship. Something fast. Something loud. Within the hour, Kane stood on the bridge of the Resolute, a vessel bristling with rail batteries and missile pods. Alien officers watched him warily, their postures taut with disbelief. He studied the enemy Leviathan's advance, fingers tapping the console in thought. They're expecting you to hold the line, he said. So we won't. He pointed at the holomap, eyes sharp. We'll carve them apart before they deploy their full strength. Hit the weak joints. Split their formation. No slow grind. Fast strikes. Dirty tactics. They've built doctrine to counter everything but us. The crews shifted uneasily. One officer muttered, "That sounds suicidal." Kane looked him dead in the eye. "Everything about being human is suicidal. That's why it works." The battle began in a blaze of fire. The enemy ship launched drones by the thousands, blotting out the stars. Kane barked orders, voice steady, each word a hammer. "Target the drone carriers. Ignore the swarms. Cut off the head." Rail cannons thundered, missiles streaked into the void. 2 enemy carriers burst apart in fireballs, scattering debris into their own formations. The swarm faltered. The enemy adapted. Heavy beams lanced across space, tearing through coalition frigates. Kane's jaw tightened. He seized the calm. "Pull back those ships, bait them. Make them chase." The alien helmsman hesitated. "That will expose us." "Do it!" Kane snapped. The frigates wheeled away. The enemy beams tracked them, overcommit. Kane seized the opening. "Now! Broadside volley!" The Resolute's cannons unleashed hell. The beams missed their mark, and the Leviathan reeled under the assault. Its armor cracked, venting fire into the void. Kane leaned forward, voice low. "Bleed, you bastard!" Hours blurred into brutal exchanges. Kane fought with precision born of desperation, anticipating every shift in enemy patterns. He didn't fight like an admiral. He fought like a cornered soldier, turning every maneuver into a blade. Celine stood at his side, relaying signals, eyes fierce. "We've cut their numbers by half. But they're bringing in reinforcements." Kane's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but his gaze never faltered. "Then we finish this before they arrive." The enemy Leviathan reoriented, charging its main weapon. A sphere of energy gathered at its core, glowing like a miniature star. One shot, and the Resolute would be vapor. Kane exhaled. His voice was calm, steady, final. "All ships, focus fire on that core. Now. Everything you've got." The fleet obeyed. Missiles streaked like meteors. Cannons roared. The void filled with fire. The Leviathan unleashed its beam, blinding white, cutting space itself. But the concentrated barrage struck its core at the same instant. The explosion shattered the ship from within, tearing it apart in a cascade of fire and twisted steel. The shockwave hurled the Resolute sideways, systems screaming, alarms wailing. Kane clutched the rail, teeth gritted. Through the viewport, the Leviathan disintegrated, fragments spinning into the dark. Silence fell across the bridge. Then the comms erupted with cheers, from humans, from aliens, from voices Kane never thought he'd hear together. Celine smiled for the first time that day. "You did it!" Kane shook his head, eyes locked on the wreckage. "No. We bought time. That's all." The Chancellor's voice came through the secure channel, taut with restrained awe. "Human. Against every expectation you prevailed. Perhaps your kind is more than a liability." Kane leaned over the comms panel, voice steady, raw. "You still don't get it. This wasn't about me. This was about us. About what happens when humanity stops playing by your rules. You think this was victory? It was just a warning." He cut the channel before the Chancellor could respond. When the stars settled back into silence, Kane stood alone on the bridge for a moment, letting the weight sink in. He thought of Earth, of cities lost, of his son somewhere out there in the dark. His fists clenched. The war wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. And if the galaxy wanted to test humanity, they were about to learn the hardest lesson of all. Humans don't endure wars. They end them. The wreckage of the Leviathan drifted across the void, glowing embers fading into darkness. The fleet's comms buzzed with victory, alien officers cheering in disbelief, but Kane stood silent on the Resolute's bridge. His eyes weren't on the debris, they were on the tactical feed still pulsing red. Celine Ward leaned over his shoulder. "They're regrouping." He nodded grimly. "That was just their vanguard. The real fight hasn't arrived yet." Across the feed, signals flared on the edge of the system. Dozens more Leviathans. Hundreds of carriers. An armada large enough to swallow sectors whole. The cheering died. Reality set in. The Coalition Council reappeared on the holoscreen, faces tight with fear. Chancellor Marek's voice cracked under pressure. Human, you've proven resourceful. But no fleet can withstand this. We must withdraw, consolidate, preserve what remains. Kane's jaw tightened. Withdraw, and you hand them the galaxy. You've been doing that for centuries, backing away, conceding, surviving. That's not survival. That's slow death. Vareth hissed, scales flickering. Then what? You propose we fight until extinction? Kane's voice cut like steel. No. We fight so hard extinction looks at us and blinks. The council dissolved into arguments. Kane turned to Celine, lowering his voice. If we hold the line here, we'll lose. But if we strike deeper, cut their command structure, we might buy something bigger than time. Celine's brow furrowed. You're talking suicide. He met her gaze, eyes burning. I'm talking about giving humanity more than a grave marker. The next hours blurred with preparation. The Resolute was battered, patched with what little the engineers could spare. Kane called for volunteers, expecting hesitation, maybe silence. Instead, the alien officers, still shaken by his command in battle, stepped forward one by one. Even Vareth. You are reckless, the scaled commander growled. But I have seen worse plans succeed under less conviction. I will follow this once. Kane gave a curt nod. Then let's make it count. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Use the remnants of the fleet as bait, draw the armada's focus, then drive the Resolute and a handful of strike ships straight into the enemy's command vessel. If they could cripple it, maybe the swarm would fracture. The fleet launched into the dark, engines burning bright against the void. The enemies surged to meet them, black leviathans eclipsing the stars. The scale was overwhelming, yet Kane's voice on calm steadied every heart. Listen to me. You're not soldiers of a dozen broken empires anymore. You're the line between everything we love and the nothing waiting behind those ships. Fight like it matters, because it does. The clash was apocalyptic. The void erupted with fire and light as fleets slammed into each other. Drones swarmed, beams carved through hulls, ships disintegrated into dust. The bait worked. Enemy forces pressed hard against the Coalition's main line, giving Kane his opening. The Resolute dove through gaps, engines screaming. Celine's fingers flew across controls, charting a path through chaos. There! She shouted. Command vessel ahead! It loomed larger than anything Kane had seen, a fortress in motion, its surface crawling with weapons. Straight through, Kane ordered. Vareth barked in disbelief. That's death! Kane's mouth twisted. That's war. They broke into the command vessel's shadow. Enemy fire tore into the Resolute's hull, alarms wailing. Kane didn't flinch. Load every missile. Every rail round. Everything we've got. Aim for their core. Celine's voice wavered. If we fire at this range, the blast. I know. The crew stared at him. Realization sank like a blade. This wasn't just a strike. It was sacrifice. Kane stepped to the center of the bridge, voice rising above the chaos. This is it. The galaxy thinks humans endure. They're wrong. We end. Today, we show them how. The Resolute tore forward, shields collapsing, hull burning. Enemy drones swarmed like locusts, clawing at their sides. Celine clutched the console, eyes locked on Kane. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was soft, almost human again. Tell them we fought like hell. Tell them humanity didn't bow. She swallowed hard. I'll tell them more. I'll tell them you scared the galaxy into remembering our name. Their eyes held for one breath longer. Then Kane turned away. Fire! The Resolute unleashed everything, missiles, rails, torpedoes. The weapons dug into the command vessel's core, fire blooming across its surface. Energy built, a chain reaction ripping through its systems. The enemy ship convulsed, imploding in a blaze that devoured half its escorts. The shockwave tore across the field, scattering drones, breaking formation. On the Resolute, the lights flickered. Hull breaches screamed through corridors. Systems died one by one. Celine, gripping the console, transmitted the final message to the fleet. Target destroyed. Formation shattered. Now's your chance. Strike! The last thing she heard was Kane's voice, steady in the storm. We didn't ask for this war. But we'll finish it on our terms. When the flames cleared, the Resolute was gone. But the enemy was broken. Leaderless, scattered, their armada faltered. Coalition ships surged forward, rallying around the gap Kane had torn open. For the first time in centuries, the tide turned. Days later, Celine stood before the Coalition Council. Her uniform was torn, her face pale, but her voice carried. You wanted proof of humanity's worth. You got it. Elias Kane gave you victory at the cost of everything. Don't waste it. The Chancellor's silence spoke louder than any speech. Even Vareth bowed his head. Word spread. Not just across the Coalition, but across the galaxy. The story of a single human who shattered the simulation and then broke the enemy's command vessel became legend. To some, he was a warning. To others, salvation. For humanity, scattered and enslaved, it was something else entirely. It was a signal. Kane's name carried across hidden channels, whispered in prisons, carved into walls, broadcast in coded transmissions. Humans don't endure wars. They end them. ***. Far beyond the rim, in the heart of enemy space, a council of shadowed figures studied the wreckage of their fallen ship. Their leader's voice was cold, calculating. The human is gone. But his kind remains. Another replied, almost reverent. If one man could undo us in hours, what will billions do? The silence that followed was not fear. It was recognition. And somewhere, in the ashes of forgotten worlds, the whisper began. Elias Kane wasn't just a man. He was the spark. The galaxy hadn't seen the end of humanity. It had just seen the beginning.